Okay, we're just 1 minute past 11, so we're going to just get underway with a bit of an introduction. So good morning, everyone, and welcome to this session, Missing Women Confidently Shaping the Agenda. I'm Alison Gallagher Hughes, and I'm delighted to host this conversation on behalf of CIPR Midlands. Today's session explores how societal norms and bias continues to shape our experiences and challenge the confidence of women professionals in our industry. These cultural forces don't stop at the office door. They influence how women are perceived, promoted, and supported throughout their careers. And this has led to a lack of female representation at senior levels. The CIPR's Missing Women report explores the root causes of this issue. So today we'll be asking, how can we change this narrative? What practical steps can we take to create an industry culture where confidence is nurtured and not eroded, and where women not only stay but thrive in senior roles? Before we get underway, a quick note. The first part of this session is being recorded. The second half will be more of a conversation. We want this to be a safe, open space where you feel encouraged to be part of this. So you can engage by using the chat function or raising your virtual hand and come on screen and speak with us. If you prefer to share a question anonymously or want to make a point or reference an experience that you've had, you're very welcome to do so. If you can just send a direct message to my CIPR Midlands colleague, Emma Davis, who will share your question on your behalf. And now I'm thrilled to introduce our fantastic panel. So today we have with us Isabel Wilson-Cleary, a key contributor to the Missing Women report, whose research has helped shine a light on the confidence gap in PR. Advita Patel, who is president of CIPR and a leading confidence coach who works with individuals and organisations to build inclusive and confident workplaces. And Emma McMillan, founder of Fieldfare Communications and a powerful advocate of equity, authenticity and leadership in our profession. Please join me in giving them a very warm welcome, and let's dive into this vital conversation. So Isabel, over to you.
Great, thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. I'm just going to share my slides, so bear with me a second. Everyone see that deck? All good. Great, perfect. Great. So thank you, Alison, for that introduction. It's really great. My name's Isabel. I'm Head of Communications and Engagement at the University of Birmingham, and I was one of the researchers on the Missing Women project that ran last year. So I'll give you a whistle-stop tour of kind of what led to the project, some of the findings, and then the recommendations that we talked about in the research, and then hopefully that sets us up for a nice conversation. So I was one of the researchers on the project. There were 3 of us involved. I became involved partly because I had been part of a cohort of Socially Mobile, which is kind of a 10-week leadership and communications program, where I recognised that actually a lot of my fellow participants were women who were returning from parental leave, or they'd returned in previous years, and actually that seemed to be quite a barrier to their kind of career progression or their sense of what was possible. And I recognised that potentially I'm kind of mid-career at the minute, that could be something that I'm at risk of as well. And I was just really interested to be able to delve in to that research a little bit more. So the issue that the project was exploring was really around the clear shortfall that Alison mentioned within the industry. So women do tend to dominate in kind of more junior roles, but that flips almost mirror image-wise once you get to more senior roles, when men then become kind of more represented in senior leadership. And Stephen Waddington, who had led the research, he had noted that in the most recent CIPR population report, which takes kind of ONS data, that there was actually a figure that you could attribute to that, which was around 4,000 practitioners who had either left the industry mid-career, women who'd decided that maybe PR wasn't for them, or just who hadn't advanced into senior roles. And so really the basis of the report was to delve into this issue a bit more, to try and understand why this was and what might be possible, what could be done to mitigate it. So as I said, I was one of 3 researchers. So Stephen led the project, and then myself and 2 other researchers who were also graduates of the Socially Mobile programme, supported with kind of looking over the survey and doing interviews as well. So there was 3 elements. There was a literature review, there was a survey that was promoted across kind of different groups and online, and then the semi-structured interviews that myself and a couple of other colleagues worked on. And then Sarah Waddington and Ben Verinder are also supporting on kind of the project management aspect of the project. And really it aimed to kind of unpack the obstacles that women face in public relations, particularly in England and Wales, because that was the basis of the data, where that data set had come from, to highlight the interconnected barriers that kind of prevent progress, and to try and offer some solutions, start a conversation that might lead to solutions to achieve gender equality across the PR profession. It was funded by the CIPR Research Fund, which just a shout out, I think, for how great that is as a profession and industry, that there's opportunities to be able to kind of, you know, go for funding that can support delving into some of these issues a little bit further. And the project started, Stephen started it probably around spring, around this time last year. And then the main bulk of the research was underway between kind of August and December, with kind of right up towards the end of the year. So the literature review kind of helped to set the scene. It was really looking at kind of what does the existing literature already say about why women are leaving the industry. This may come as no surprise to many of you on the call, but work-life balance was something that came out quite strongly, particularly in terms of kind of managing quite demanding schedules with any sort of caring responsibilities that you may have at home, or even just if it wasn't caring responsibilities, just being able to do other things outside of work, I suppose. Maybe unsurprisingly linked to that, then there was also reported kind of high levels of burnout linked to quite intense workload and the pressure and the idea of having to always be on and engaged in what's going on. And then limited career development opportunities and particularly kind of pathways towards leadership. All 3 of those came out in the literature review that Stephen had undertaken, and that helped to shape the survey that was constructed, the online survey that went out, looking at kind of what sort of challenges and opportunities women experienced. So the findings from the survey, there was a real mix of women who had responded to the survey, and then also those who then agreed to be interviewed as well. Different backgrounds, different circumstances, different career pathways. You know, we had women who were the main household earners, but also had children and were in leadership positions. We had people who had moved into self-employment for autonomy reasons, and then also women who were kind of mid or senior career but didn't have the sort of more traditional caring responsibilities at home. So there was a real mix, but I think what was common across the results was that, you know, more than half, almost 2 in 3, said that they'd experienced gender-based discrimination or harassment, and then just over 50% felt that they didn't have kind of opportunities to advance. Similarly, we'd asked a question around how women felt about gender equality in their current workplace, or wherever that was at the moment in time that they completed the survey, and only 1 in 5, or less than even, rated it as excellent, which I think kind of says quite a lot around how women are feeling at the minute about working in PR roles. Maybe not specific to kind of gendered dynamics in the workplace, but definitely something that came through quite strongly. Kind of long working hours and how that affects being able to juggle a work-life balance also came through. So, you know, almost 3 in 5 working more than 50 hours a week, 1 in 5 saying that they actually worked more than 50. And then quite a broad range of, you know, work-life balance being pretty average, but also not an insignificant number, suggesting that it was actually quite poor, very poor, almost just over a quarter of those who had responded. So it really feels like there's quite a lot to unpack there, just in terms of the experiences of the women who responded to the survey. And then we also asked the women about particular challenges that they felt that they faced, and to kind of highlight those in particular. You may note that the top three, so burnout, limited advancement opportunities, and high pressure work environments, very much reflects what emerged from the literature review as well. But there was also quite strong themes across kind of survey results around poor workplace culture, a lack of kind of mentorship and that opportunity to engage with those in women who are in senior leadership positions and kind of get some direction and support. Work-life balance came up, the lack of kind of representation in leadership, and then also unequal pay, although interestingly not as highly as some of the other issues that were raised. I think quite a lot of the in the survey there was basically you could select, kind of self-select, but then also offer free text comments. And there was really rich data within those. Women were very happy to share their experiences and how that felt like for them. And a lot of them talked around, particularly around workplace culture, that idea of kind of, particularly in agency life, competition kind of dominating culture within the workplace, which led to those kind of high pressure work environments and really feeling as if they couldn't switch off, because if you're in a PR role, you have to be able to respond to media requests and things like that at any time, and how they struggled with that in some aspects to then be able to kind of say that they could log off completely. Lack of life stage support also came through, particularly in terms of that work-life balance as well. So women returning to work, thinking about kind of what that phased return might look like and what opportunities they felt they had once they'd come back into the workplace, or lack of. And then, as often comes up in lots of conversations around PR, there was kind of a strong theme around lack of career progression, but also how that may be linked to recognition of PR as a strategic function as well. But despite all of the challenges that the women who responded talked about, it was also really clear from the findings that a lot of them felt overwhelmingly positive about the career opportunities within PR and PR as kind of a career pathway. Certainly, the women that I interviewed were all, I think all of them said that they would recommend it as a career pathway, that they found it very interesting, and they wouldn't want to put younger women coming through off. But then lots of them highlighted, you know, the strategic impact and influence that public relations and communications can have, the opportunity to be creative and the intellectual stimulation that comes from working in PR and kind of working across different briefs. And then how integral relationship building and networks are to working in PR, and particularly who like working in social settings and relationships really get you going, then it's a really good career pathway. So most women were, you know, overwhelmingly positive, kind of 9 in 10 rated their job satisfaction as very good, good, or average. It was only 1 in 10 who were maybe not having a particularly good time, rated it poor or very poor. And I think that then really also translated into what emerged from the findings in terms of the kind of creative workarounds that women have found in order to be able to continue doing what they love, but maybe having to juggle that and navigate that with kind of career compromises or personal costs. So, you know, women who had moved into freelancing, consulting, or started their own business because it enabled them to set their own hours, their own terms, to choose their clients, to log off when they needed to and take time for the family. Moving from kind of agency roles into in-house or vice versa, definitely with a perception that in-house maybe offers more opportunity for flexible working, and maybe it's more acceptable and accepted as a kind of workplace culture, that, you know, you can log off at 3 to go pick up the kids and then you come back, or for any reason, that kind of flexible working. There was definitely a sense of women who would strive really hard to look for progressive employers and use that as a kind of key metric when they were looking out for new roles and opportunities around who they would work with, kind of what policies do they have, how do they present the work that they do, how do they showcase kind of diversity and inclusion in their work. And then also women who had invested in their own development, so women who had, say, applied and done the Socially Mobile programme, CIPR, professional development courses, that kind of thing. There was quite a strong through line of that in terms of women who had used kind of those professional development opportunities as a way to stay up to date and to kind of, I guess, counteract maybe some of the experiences that they have in the workplace where maybe they feel that their work is devalued. But with all that being said, it's great that all these women have found these creative workarounds, but it's obviously not necessarily where we would want kind of the sector and the industry to be. So when we moved towards analysis, it really came through that there was kind of three elements to this when you kind of categorized all of that together. And a lot of it is bigger than any sort of individual person or individual workplace potentially. But you had kind of cultural barriers that came up. So sense of kind of a boys' club. So quite a lot of women talked around peers that they'd come up with, male peers, and at the point of time that they had maybe gone off on parental leave or something like that, when they came back, their colleagues had been promoted into other roles, or they were no longer accepted into kind of the cultural spaces that they had previously occupied. There was maybe assumptions about what they could or couldn't do, after work drinks, after work networking events, things like that, that they felt that they were maybe being pushed out of. And then as previously mentioned, that kind of devaluation of PR as soft work often. And that links obviously very much with the structural. So in terms of kind of within organisations, the limited development pathways, the lack of support when returning to work, or the lack of visibility of what is possible, or the options that might be available for flexible working and what that could look like. And particularly, I think the women who talked about moving into part-time roles or considering it, that notion of kind of a part-time penalty and not really seeing senior roles that were part-time, and so a sense that you kind of get stuck if that is an option that you have to take. And then obviously the societal kind of interlinks with that. So this is not to say that this is a unique experience for women just working in the PR sector, but actually this kind of interlinks and interconnects with women generally shouldering a really disproportionate amount of kind of caregiving actually, but also expectations around what that looks like. And therefore more likely to have to make those trade-offs or be able to compromise and think about, you know, how do we justify childcare costs and things like that. And then we moved on to really look at kind of what we could do, what's possible, what's happening in the space, what did women feel like they needed, or where did they feel like there was good practice already happening in their experience in their current workplace or in other places that they'd worked previously. And kind of couching this very much in, for me anyway, I really couch it in a sense of not only what is right in terms of kind of fairness and equality, but also this becomes, it's a talent issue, right? If we're losing a cohort of women who are very experienced and have the right skills and creativity, we want to be able to keep them in PR. And so actually, what is the cost of not doing anything about this to try and address it? So some of the things that emerged from that in terms of recommendations, those kind of 5 key areas. So leadership development programs, but very much recognizing that they need to be kind of tailored to particular cohorts. So maybe as part of kind of succession planning, thinking about raising up and supporting emerging leaders and trying to diversify at senior levels more quickly. And also linking that to, I suppose, not just thinking that those leadership development programs are because there's something that women need to do to change, but actually how do those programs then link back to other activities that are happening across the workplace to ensure that the workplace is ready for women? That came through really strongly when women were referencing leadership development programs. And then also thinking about kind of flexible working patterns and that being kind of on the table without there being career penalties, or sometimes without even needing to ask. So how do you know, what do core hours look like in your workplace? What is the visibility of flexible working at senior levels? How accepted is it? How much of a norm is it without necessarily even asking? Things like senior level job sharing came out that people didn't really see that very often, but when they did, they thought it was quite interesting and they'd like to know more about how that could potentially be rolled out in other contexts. Life stage support and wellbeing support as well is kind of a key recommendation. So not just around return to work following parental leave, but, you know, as the workforce gets older, perimenopause, menopause support, kind of the many different life stages that everyone goes through, but particularly women, there are particular kind of biological, I suppose, moments that do have an effect on kind of how we work, and what that might look like, and particularly the importance of line managers within that, and equipping people with not just the here's the policy, but what does support around keep in touch days look like? What could it look like? And then also culture change, so structural and organisational reform, so a real zero tolerance for any sort of discrimination, and an environment where you can constructively call that out, and it is called out. And also making sure that from leadership all the way down, kind of through the different levels, that's a real core part of kind of the culture that you're trying to build. And equally thinking about, gender pay gap reporting is great, but how do you move from reporting on something like that into kind of equal pay audits, looking like really delving under to understand what's the progression of women within organisations. Are women progressing every year as they're changing kind of representation at senior leadership level? And then also the age-old kind of strategic value of PR being recognised and doing more around that space. That's my last slide. I'll stop sharing. But that's kind of where, yeah, the report really ended on a note of kind of the recommendations, and as part of thinking about what everyone can do to take the report and maybe think about what they can do in their own workplaces, what's already happening, how do we shout louder about the good work that's going on, or challenge each other to think about where we need to move to next, which I hope segues quite neatly into Advita.
Before Advita asks you to take centre stage, I just wanted to kind of thank you very much for your presentation, Isabel. I thought it kind of takes the report on that next step and really sort of identifies specifics. I did want to ask you a question in terms of obviously their top line sort of findings.
Yeah.
Did you find any difference between when you looked at a granular level, but say between agency and in-house, or north or south in terms of the country? Because obviously we always get this impression of big agencies in London, perhaps it being more pressured, but I suspect maybe that's not true.
So I'm not so sure about the geographical. I don't think we necessarily analyze the data through that lens. I can double check that and come back to you, but definitely I think more anecdotally maybe in terms of in-house and agency. So I think the skew was in terms of respondents more agency, but the few people, I definitely spoke to a few women who were working in-house and had made that move, particularly because they thought or they sensed that, I spoke to one woman, she worked in kind of retail in agency and then moved into basically a client and worked in-house, and she found that worked a lot better for her. It was much more accepted without having to ask necessarily to work flexible hours. And it kind of suited where she was at in terms of career at that particular moment.
That's another really interesting point, because it's hugely surprising to me that even in this day and age where we've obviously had to see further flexibility in terms of when, for example, when COVID happened, and now we have the technology infrastructure to allow greater opportunities for work from home or hybrid working. There is still kind of a lack of opportunities for job share or part-time work, which is just even kind of proactive organisations seem to kind of close that down, possibly because they're frightened of additional on costs.
Yeah.
But surely the skills and talents that two people could bring to a role, or providing that extra flexibility as a part-time option, could enrich that role and that organisation further. So it's incredibly short-sighted, I think, that that more organisations close those options or close those routes down, which would enable women to have that work-life balance that they're looking to achieve. With that, I'm going to ask Advita to kind of pick up on some of those themes. And one of the questions I have for Advita is perhaps she could outline some of the initiatives that CIPR particularly are looking at introducing to address some of these issues. I don't know whether you want to take that at the end of your deck, Advita.
Yeah, I'll talk about the CIPR and the kind of what we're aiming to do based on the research and other bits of feedback we've had. But to add to Isabel's great presentation, one of the things that we have to be quite conscious of, and Elizabeth Isabel mentioned this in her session, that this isn't a women's problem, by the way. You know, it's not our problem to fix, and it's not our problem to solve independently. You know, this is a collective problem across all organisations that we need to be aware of. And the reason I talk a lot around the confidence element is because there is sometimes confidence can be weaponized towards women specifically, to say that the reason they're not getting the promotions or the reason they're not succeeding is because they're struggling with their confidence, or, you know, they have imposter syndrome and they don't know their value. The challenge we often have as women is that our value is diminished because the organisation's systemic barriers don't allow us to succeed. Due to some of the challenges that you spoke about, Alison, and what Isabel mentioned as well, around not enough flexibility or not enough support, not enough mentorship. What I often talk about in the organisations that I support is what does a good look like in organisations for everyone to succeed, for specifically women. And then if you take on board, I know Emma's going to talk about this after my section, is around the intersectionalities of women as well. So, you know, not only are we talking about from a gender perspective, but we need to also look at obviously age, race, religion, disability, sexuality. You know, put all that in the mix, and you've got all sorts of challenges as well that sometimes are not considered in the workplace. So as you can see on the slide that I've just shared, we often look at confidence as a personal issue, but it's actually a professional issue. And it's a challenge that impacts organisations continuously. And that's why today's session around the confidence gap is quite significant for us to talk about. Because confidence, in the research I've done over the last 7 years, is not only impacting how we show up as individuals, and that is like the personal side, but also in terms of the disadvantages the organisations are creating for themselves when they don't look at the challenges that lack of confidence or self-esteem brings in the workplace, thanks to some of the behaviours that they're demonstrating. So Isabel mentioned the boys' club mentality, or when women return from carers leave and maternity leave, not having the right resources in place to help them succeed, or feeling like we shouldn't really make a fuss or rock the boat too much because we're already at a disadvantage from the support we receive. But if we were to adapt and adopt some of the lessons learned from previous experiences, the organisations that have taken this seriously have seen not only their culture thrive, but also profitability increase as well. And it's no surprise to anybody on this call today that having you know, more profit when people feel included and feel like they belong is connected all the time. And we talk about this in inclusion frequently, that when people feel included and feel belong into the workplace, and that changes how they perform. And when they perform well, it impacts the bottom line. So there is a business case attached to all of this. I wanted to talk about some of the interconnections, and as I said, Emma will pick this up in the next bit, but there's 3 kind of key areas that impacts at the workplace and then how we show up as well, and how people expect to show up, is career, confidence and health. So if our career is going well and we're getting support, then our confidence is automatically boosted, and which then helps our health. When things are not going as great and everything is not going in the direction wanted and people have to exit, then the confidence, self-esteem is lowered, and that does overall impact not only our physical health but also our mental health. And there's lots of research out there that demonstrates that out of everybody that kind of goes through challenges from health perspective in the workplace, women specifically are the ones that are impacted the most overall. Now, there's some clear research out there. Oops, sorry, let me go back. Which I have researched, because it's always quite important to talk about some of this work, because people just assume it's a load of women whinging and complaining. But there's actual research, as you can see, that says 900,000 UK women left jobs due to menopause symptoms. 67% of the women say that their confidence has held them back. 1 in 4 women experience reproductive health challenges. Menstrual fertility, menopause stigma is still really strong, and career break penalties remain stark for women returning to work. It aligns a lot with the research that Isabel and the Socially Mobile team did. And it's no coincidence that women exit the career mid-level, because that is where the perimenopause symptoms do kick in. You know, we talk about menopause more openly than we ever have done before, but the physical and the mental health symptoms of menopause is significant. And it's good that some organisations are talking about it. But what I've found in some of my research is that it can be quite performative and tokenistic as well. So that's something to be mindful of. When we get to our early 40s, you know, symptoms start showing up for a lot of women in the early 40s, perimenopause, and that's generally the time women are applying for more senior roles. So that's when you would expect probably 15 to 18 years into your career, you're going for that C-suite positions. It's no coincidence that when you're in that time in your career that you're struggling with symptoms, your hormones are changing in your body. If you've got children, your children are probably going through preteens or just starting off in their own journey of puberty. So you're managing all of those symptoms. It's also around that time where your parents need support. So you've got caring responsibilities if you've got guardians and parents, and not only for your own parents, but probably for your partner's parents, because even if you've got the incredible partner in at home, you know, generally women still take on 80% of the caring responsibilities, just because that's just our nature. Sometimes that's what we end up doing. And then you're juggling all of that alongside applying for senior roles. And if the organisation is not set up for you to succeed and doesn't give you grace that you're dealing with some of these challenges, then the likelihood is, to the report that Isabel spoke about, is you're going to exit because you're burnt out. And I used to work in a mental health hospital early on in my career. So I suppose you can say I was lucky or not so lucky to kind of witness some of the impact this has had on individuals when it comes to burnout. And feeling that you can no longer continue down that path because you're juggling not only work, but you're also juggling a lot of personal challenges at home, which we don't want to talk about in the workplace because we want to seem as, you know, we're doing this well, we can cope, we can have everything, we don't need any support, it's absolutely okay. And then when we don't put ourselves forward for opportunities, so we're not given those opportunities, we feel that we can't continue generally. So we talk a lot around mentorship, which is great. And I think mentorship is a great part of what we need as people in the workplace. But one thing that we don't do enough of is sponsorship. So the difference between men and women in the workplace generally is that men get a lot of sponsorship. So what I mean by that is that they're often spoken about in rooms and given opportunities where they're not visible. So somebody there will be championing them. You know, they'll be taken to the golf course to have a game of golf with some influencers or some people who decision makers. They may be taken out for dinner. They may have been given projects and programs to be shown opportunities in terms of their skills. Women don't get that. Women get a lot of mentoring, which is not, I'm not saying it's a bad thing. You know, it's good to have mentors, but we need sponsors. We need sponsors in the sense that we need decision makers that can help us get into rooms where we may not have voices or we may not have visibility. We need sponsors to champion us. And we need people to really take our skills and showcase them on our behalf. And we just don't have enough of that in the workplace. And it's something to really think about when we're asking for support in our organisations about what does that sponsorship look like for you. Everyone is different and everybody needs different support, but talking to a mentor who's been through it all before is useful, but not helpful in the workplace. We also need to look at not looking at confidence as a personal challenge, it's a professional issue. So we need to be talking about it quite openly and not secret squirrels or behind closed doors or feeling like we should be ashamed of it. We all have challenges with confidence. If you look at confidence as, I always say to people, look at confidence as branches on a tree. And so confidence is branches on a tree, self-esteem is the roots of that tree. And if those roots are not fed and nourished and nurtured, then the branches are going to break. So if you feel that you're not worth it, that's your self-esteem, then you can't do it, and that's your confidence. So if you're not nurtured and nourished and supportive from the roots perspective, it doesn't matter how many leadership courses you go on, doesn't matter how much training you're given, it doesn't matter how much they invest in the kind of tactical skill set and the technical skill set. If you don't feel that inner value, you will still exit and you still won't be able to succeed. So you need to look at the kind of self-esteem elements of it. Look at am I able to talk about this openly? Is this culture safe enough for me to thrive? Am I psychologically safe to speak about some of the challenges that are coming facing me in the home? Am I okay to say to my manager that I need to leave early because I've got a caring responsibility, or I've just got a really I'm managing some very complex symptoms that I need to take care of? Are we able to do that in the workplace confidently, knowing that it won't impact our career? And those are the things that knock our self-esteem, which is where we feel worth it. And that's what we need to think about when it comes to training, because to Isabel's point, we should be having leadership training, but if you're not doing everything else around it, then you can put women on loads of different courses and it still won't change the kind of impact we need in the workplace. The allyship from leaders, role modeling, there was a huge when the report was released, as some of you may have seen in certain groups, there was discussions about allyship and the male allies specifically about what support they can give. And a lot of the male allies feel that they can't. What can I do? What can I say? What can I support with? And often they are the decision makers. To the stats that Isabel showed, 54% of men in senior positions can make those decisions and can change and can advocate and ally and be allies for women in the workplace. So it's not always women who are having to speak up about challenges. And when we do conversations like this, it's often women. Today's call is all women on here and stuff. And I've seen, even when I did this presentation at the CIPD Festival of Work, there's 300 people there, but I would say there's probably about 6 men in total. This isn't a women's challenge, and I will keep saying this time and time again. If we don't have men in the conversation, we can't, it's going to be very difficult for us to change anything, mainly because, whether we like it or not, men are in the decision-making seats, as we clearly saw from the stats that Isabel showed. And if men don't influence the change, then we're just going to be talking to each other about some of the stuff that's going on. One of the things, these are some of the kind of practicalities that we should be having in the workplace around support. You will all know this, you probably have this in some of your workplaces, and some of you will have experienced this personally, but we need to be able to talk about the menopause friendly policies, the fertility treatment support, flexible working, health related leave, and line manager education. Line managers are the most vital barriers, I would say, in the workplace. So you could have these incredible policies and processes in place, but if line managers don't understand them or don't align with them, then we are going to face into a lot of challenge. And what in my internal comms hat on, that is sometimes a barrier in the workplace when managers don't know what they can and can't do, or don't know what they can and can't say, and make assumptions and stereotypes about certain individuals, which causes the confidence challenges facing not only in themselves about what can I say and how can I support, but also in the people that they're supporting around them. And this is what I mean about it not being a problem for us to solve and educate, but the organisation to be talking about this quite openly and making it everybody's problem, not only one specific demographic or characteristic in the workplace. So I think hopefully that takes us quite nicely into Emma.
I think so, yeah. Thank you, Advita. Yeah, and I guess sort of the point of me sort of being here is I think probably just to kind of shine a bit of a personal light on some of the things that we've been talking about so far. And as a bit of background, to me, I've worked in comms, various guises, since leaving, actually even while I was at university. Even before that, I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease when I was 9 years old. So I've lived with Crohn's disease, a sort of severe form of Crohn's disease, for my entire life, basically. And obviously it's been a kind of key feature of my professional life, my working life as well. And I was doing the stats earlier, sort of totting up what I think it kind of meant in terms of interruption to work. And since starting work, I've had 8 major surgeries, and probably a maximum in 1 year of about 26 weeks off work. So some really kind of quite significant interruption to work, and you know, a daily kind of battle, I guess, to contribute in the way that I want to contribute, while still trying to protect my health and my well-being. And so much of what's talked about in this report, and that Isabel and Advita have referred to as well, it just really hits home for me. And I think there's sort of a couple of key things in particular. One is around the sort of the part-time penalty. I mean, it took quite a long time for me to realise that working in that full-time, always on firefighting mode was very detrimental to my health. It probably took me longer than to realise than it should have done. And I think so much of that is bound up in this self-esteem piece that Advita's referred to. My absolute need to prove my worth, to prove you know, that I'm as good as my male counterparts, and almost in many respects sort of shoring up some credit. So sort of making sure that, like, I've done a good enough job on the days that I'm well to then make up for the days that I have to take off sick, very often at last minute, you know, no warning kind of thing. So usually very disruptive. But certainly the attitude in my first place of work to part-time working was that you were less committed, probably weren't looking to rise through the ranks, get ahead, anything like that. It was seen as it's almost the domain of middle-aged women with children. And as a, you know, younger woman with no children but a health condition that, you know, that did want to get ahead, that was incredibly off-putting. So I did not explore that until I actually moved into an in-house setting. And that's another thing that's really resonated for me as well, in the report and in the conversations that we've been having today around that kind of, in the report it refers to it as sort of almost career strategies. It's sort of like having to be really strategic about your career choices. And honestly, every single move I've made has been really strategic and very deliberately trying to keep my options open, because I don't know what it's going to mean if I get boxed in. And I've done that flip-flopping from consultancy to in-house. Well, it started up in-house, moved to consultancy, moved back in-house in the hope that that would offer me some more security, not least enhanced sick leave, which I really felt that I needed. And it wasn't until a conversation with a coach, probably about 2 years ago, when I sort of said, of course, I can't leave my current role. I can't leave in-house work because, you know, I was burnt out and exhausted, because I get paid time off and I won't be safe, basically. And she kind of held a bit of a mirror up and said, well, what if working in this way is the thing that's making you ill? And it was one of those kind of like, oh yes, kind of moments. And so that is what led to me ultimately setting up my own consultancy. So going back to, again, that sort of what we see very commonly of sort of women setting up as independent practitioners to gain some sort of control over life and well-being, and have a bit more flexibility in terms of how we work, and you know, have time for relationships and fun and, you know, time outdoors, all of that sort of thing. It just feels so contradictory, so at odds to what we hear so much in the work context. But the other thing that I really wanted to pick up on as well was around line managers, and Advita like absolutely underlined the point for me, which is that we do not do enough to equip line managers to have these kinds of conversations. I mean, Crohn's disease is not a sexy subject. Like, nobody really wants to talk about poo or bowel habits or anything like that. And early on in my career, I've always been really open about it. I just think it's easier. I don't want to feel shame about it. And I made a comment in the office, and I was really, really kind of shamed for mentioning it. And what that does in terms of your confidence, your ability to express needs, you know, to look after yourself, to kind of put your interests first from a well-being perspective. You know, it comes back to what Advita was saying about confidence. It just, you know, had I not probably been made of sterner stuff, I think it would have obliterated me. In fact, probably more than anything else, it just made me a bit more determined to talk about poo. But I do think, just kind of to the point around policies, and not being tokenistic about our approaches to these things, I think a lot of organisations, and I've worked for a number of them, both, you know, through consultancy roles, but also in-house, can have the best policies in the world. But if you don't have that local application of the line manager truly understanding what it means and what the importance of that flexibility, you know, what that can unlock for people that are at a disadvantage, whether that's as a result of caring responsibilities or through disability, I don't think that they truly understand the cost of that, and that their decisions, their words, application of a policy can really make or break a woman's ability to work in the way that they would want to. So for me, some real kind of education, almost understanding kind of the perhaps unintended consequences of some of these conversations that line managers are having is absolutely vital. So yeah, I could go on, but I'm conscious of time. Alison, I don't know if you want to pick up.
I mean, that's lovely. I really appreciate your honesty, Emma, because I know these, you know, particularly when it comes to personal issues, and we are kind of products of our kind of rearing, I suppose, you know, as young women, we're kind of told to be polite and not kind of, you know, maybe kind of brought up to kind of not kind of rock the boat too much. But again, you know, I think obviously we're in different times, but we are kind of a product of how we've brought up and the generation which we've been brought up in. So I think that, you know, having these open conversations now about health conditions, about menopause, about fertility, all those issues now I think are more openly spoken about, and that's got to be a good thing, because you know, we look at, you know, going back to Advita's kind of stats, which is really interesting to look at kind of cultural confidence. We can only have personal confidence if we believe that our organisation really walks the walk and not just has kind of written policies that kind of express a desire to be kind of equal and progressive. If it doesn't actually activate those policies and processes, then we're kind of a little bit lost. And sometimes those things compete against each other. So I know, Emma, we had a bit of a conversation by email about the Bradford score, which is, again, you know, it's such a discriminatory process. I don't know whether it's still in place, but something that the public sector massively adopted in order to try and reduce abstraction from the workplace. It's those people, and particularly, you know, for women who often kind of will be suffering from illnesses which result in many short-term absences. It was based on the premise of short-term absence being a ruse, and therefore we have to kind of manage this out. And this kind of led to kind of very uncomfortable conversations with people who were not in a position to best advise, certainly had no medical knowledge, and then were often, you know, maybe HR managers who had to kind of act on behalf of the organisation rather than to the benefit of the individual. Maybe that's kind of changed. I don't know. It's been a while since I've worked within kind of those sort of organisations, but it's been, you know, it's really interesting that we do kind of have now more open conversations, and that's got to be for the benefit. That being at a certain stage, we've now got 10 minutes before the end of our session. We're going to stop the recording, and we would